Here we are again.
On the quest for the Holy Grail of men, the search of power and love.
Yes, or the integration of power and love. Yeah, so we recorded a podcast. I think I uploaded it a couple of days ago, so it's quite recent, where we looked
So
at.
if you haven't heard it yet, listen to that. It's great.
Yes, it is. And yeah, it probably makes sense to listen to that one first before going into this one. We talked about people pleasing and how that shows up in men, how that even shows up in men where we might not expect people pleasing to show up. Like this is not just about the classical nice guy. This can show up in men who appear very tough and traditionally masculine on the outside as well. Yeah, we also, or you especially, questioned whether calling it people pleasing and whether we need a new language of that. But anyways, that's all in the episode before this one. And your invitation for this one was to look more closely at what are the current challenges that men are facing.
Yeah, I was kind of curious to hear from you also, and I can bring in my examples from my life, the people that I know closely, clients, people that I work with, the different places I work in, to kind of collect together what is it that men are struggling with, because we're a bit in the search of this integration, and for that of power and love, or like care and will. And there's something we're going to explore also around that, what are healthy expressions of that. But then it's also important, what are the places that aren't working, what are the expressions and the symptoms of a lack of integration, or certain elements not being present, or overemphasis on certain qualities, and kind of like a neglect of others, and so on. And there's some, yeah, there's lots to explore. So I'm curious to hear, if we talk to men that live right now, what are the pain points? How does it look like, even, and what a man maybe trying to cure their pain with? Sometimes helps, and sometimes maybe creates more pain in the long run.
Yes. Yeah, so what are their challenges, but also what are the attempted solutions?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I can start, see what I come up with.
And maybe just to position ourselves here, we are not super far away from each other in terms of age, but there's already a little bit of like you're already a little bit part of a different age. 47, you're what, 15,
31.
16, 31.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You look so fresh. So there's maybe already, as I have observed, culture is changing more and more fast, I would say. It goes faster the way cultural norms change. So I'm curious what I've observed and lived through, and what are the maybe also challenges of younger men, your age, maybe even younger. I find it super interesting also.
Yeah. Yeah. So the first thing that came up when you asked the question was being faced with a lot of contradicting expectations around who I'm supposed to be, how I'm supposed to be, like this kind of confusion of like getting different messages from different places, and very easily falling into a sense of not being good enough, or not being able to live up to the expectations that that are coming my way. So it's like and right now I'm speaking both from my own personal experience and from just a couple of men that come to mind. There is a very strong lack of orientation of where do I turn towards if I want to know how to develop into a man that I want to be, or maybe I think I want to be. Like this, it already starts mixing. Where's like a true desire to self-actualize, and where is it already mixed with images that are not mine but that are coming from the outside? That's one big theme. And then somehow connected to that, I feel, is like living in a time where, like living in a time of decay, in the sense that I feel like as a society, as a bigger group of people, there's no shared narrative of what we want to move towards and what we want to accomplish. And I think there's a lot of I think there are a lot of subtle ways how this creates suffering and lack of orientation and insecurity that is hard to grasp because everyone is in it. It's not like some people, I guess some people, have found their answer of what they follow. And I think this is something that we're seeing a lot as well, is like very dogmatic approaches becoming more popular in these times of uncertainty. But there's very little that we can collectively agree upon. And my sense is that creates a lot of insecurity and lack of orientation. Yeah, even potentially like a sense of nihilism, like just not seeing, yeah, just not seeing like a bigger picture or like a bigger sense making. Yeah, I'll start with that. I have a couple more smaller points, but curious to hear your thoughts on this.
No, that's touching to hear in a way, and speaks to my observations as well. I'm curious if we break that down even into more real life examples. I don't know if there's anything that comes to mind, like how does this look like then in the life of an average, let's say, young man, whatever young means, but these days, what does that amount to then, like
Yeah.
in terms of making decisions about life, in terms of relationships, maybe in terms of, yeah, the big decisions, what am I going to do with my life, where do I invest time, energy, commitment, what's worthwhile pursuing, deepening, and maybe what not anymore. Because that also means that certain, given, like what you said, like the standard narrative that has been breaking down, the mainstream narrative of like a world that's going to get better a little bit. It's going to be more open, more maybe wealthy, and so on and so on. It's just like breaking down, but that with that also breaks down a lot of structural tracks that you could take in life, education, career, family, this and that, taking a loan, building a house, the classical Western trajectory that was the thing to do in a way if you wanted to be a normal person,
Yeah.
quote unquote normal. So I'm curious also if you have a feeling what that, how that affects younger men in their choices.
So I think the most concrete thing that comes up is a zigzagging. If that there's a lot of like jumping between different voices or narratives that portray different ways of life as the way to go, and that there's a jumping around in between them. whether it's just internally of like, okay, this week I believe this is what it means to be a man, and I try to follow this, and then some months later I look at it and I'm like, wow, okay, that just really doesn't work, and I've heard a million voices that say that this is stupid, and so now I'm doing this, or now I believe that that's the way to go, or actually expressing itself in life, that there's like this kind of jumpiness of like trying something out, going in a direction, okay, this doesn't work, then going somewhere else. And which is interesting because this can have a frame of like, oh, you're living a colorful life and that's beautiful and great. But it can also have this like, I have no idea what the fuck I'm supposed to do, and I feel like I'm just walking around in the dark, and sometimes I think I know, and then I realize I was completely wrong again. So, and yeah, my sense is that more men are walking with the second frame, that it's like that there's a sense of I should know, and I should have a clear direction, but I don't.
Hmm.
Yeah, and now also one thing comes up that you said before we hit record, that on a relational level, it's become increasingly harder, is my sense, for men to develop a strong inner orientation of how do I want to show up, and what kind of man do I want to be in my relationships, and being more driven by like externalizing the authority on that. And then yeah, this can have many different expressions. It can be like, be a man and do the things that are classically known to be manly, or completely oppose it because that's violent, and yeah, or any kind of in between. But the moment it starts coming from an external place, that also in most cases does not seem to be interested in you developing your inner authority, but in like keeping this dependence going, yeah, that I think that also creates a sense of, being lost, and uh, jumping from one thing to the next without really something solidifying inside of like, cool, well, I followed these 10 voices and now I have an integration of them and can see how they fit in. But it's more like, well, shit, I thought it was this, but now I'm hearing this voice, and now I'm just confused. I don't know what to do.
Hmm. Yeah, so what I hear mostly throughout your descriptions is the lack of orientation and the search, the longing for kind of answers and orientation, something that gives me certainty. You
Yeah.
spoke a lot about like how it how to live in uncertain times that we definitely do live in, where a lot of given structures are not providing the answers as they used to, or the shortcomings of those structures that were always in place are becoming so apparent
Yeah.
that we just don't want to comply with that anymore, just like follow that route. And I just also thought it'd be interesting because you have been at the Mannheim conference, like a big German speaking conference for men. I think it's been a pretty big conference for a weekend, many different speakers, and been part of the leadership team there also, or the exactly how it's framed. I'm curious also if there's anything from that experience that you want to share, because it gives maybe also a broader spectrum of men that are interested in the question of what does it mean to be a man these days? What are they bringing in? What are their questions? What are their attempted solutions or trends that are on the menu there?
Yeah, I'll start by saying that one thing that works really well there is that the men that come feel really welcome as they are. And there's quite a big variety of men that come there, both speakers, but also participants of what their expression of being a man is. And it creates a great space where there's a sense of belonging among men that I think many men are missing as well. It's a sense of community among men, where differences are welcome and in many cases even appreciated. So that's one thing that I think many men are lacking, and what's working at the Manzan conference. In terms of the speakers that were present or the different voices, again, I think it's a great example where it's like it's so diverse, such different contradicting messages, but there's a framing around it where it's like, yeah, this is kind of like a marketplace of like coming together of many different voices, and you take what works for you. So there's a framing around it which welcomes this diversity, which I find really cool and powerful. It is still a big, like, individual personal challenge of like, okay, well, how do I do this? Like, how do I orient among these voices? But, you know, like there was one man who spoke about the woundedness of the man's heart and how that's a place that is collectively incredibly overlooked. And when he spoke, it was a really tender atmosphere. And I spoke with him afterwards, and it was really fun. Like, I just shared my own reflections with him, and I was like, you know, when I was listening to you, I felt like it felt too zoomed in for me to be like, yeah, this is exactly it. And I said, like, what would work for me is like talking about the heart to cock connection or something like this, like the kind of integration of different places in a man's body, and I guess different energetics. And it was so beautiful because he was like, yeah, I guess that's part of your journey to bring that forward. And in that moment I was like, yeah, now I no longer need you to be different. I can just acknowledge that, like, given your path, it makes sense that you talk about this and you're super passionate about this. And yeah, for me, there's something else that feels more integrated or just more whole to look at. And, you know, then there were other men there who were using more traditional images of how a man is supposed to show up, and you know, the kind of discipline that a man has to have with himself. And um like he shared this story where he was like walking on the beach in Brazil, and he saw a beautiful woman, and he was scared to approach her, and she walked past, and then he slapped himself in the face and turned around and spoke to her. And so um and then I reflected with some other men. They're like, like, I'm curious what that does to those parts in this man that were scared, if, you know, his approach were to slap himself so that he could do what he felt was, you know, whatever, like, appropriate in that moment. So yeah, a big diversity of different voices. And I guess the question remains, how do I navigate that diversity? And the atmosphere there is very welcoming of that diversity. So that's a really cool thing.
Yeah,
But
that's
again,
cool.
maybe just one last thing. I think it's like, uh, what baffles me is the many places where there doesn't seem to be a common ground. I mean, there are other places where there is a common ground. Like, we all want men to, like, I think everyone would agree, we want men to be both strong and soft, and to have the ability to go for what they want but stay relational, these kind of things. But then a lot of specific examples where men would share something where I would go like, oh wow, yeah, I would never, like, I would not subscribe to that, or I would not agree with that. And I think it speaks to this lack of a shared orientation. And at the same time, I also have to acknowledge that for me, it's been such a beautiful like learning field to be in that space and have so much disagreement and stay relational in those moments and be able to both honor that I disagree, but also see the good intentions that the men bring. So but it's a question mark inside of me. Like, is that something that we need to somehow find resolution for, or is the healthy thing just to come together in those disagreements and experience the friction and that's it? But it does speak to a certain lack of shared orientation we have.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. There's so much in there already now, as usual. And I listening to you, I'm noticing, well, this is definitely something that I would say is a big challenge for me and everybody else that I meet. Well, not actually everybody, but to a lot of people, let's say a lot of men, this increasing complexity that just comes with more possibilities. Because we're opening the world, still are, even there's very progressive and very regressive tendencies at work at the same time, but it's basically all an expression of something that just opens more. There's like the supermarket of the man's supermarket where you go in and pick your identity is just like expanding massively, like more and more and more shelves with more and more and more and more things. And there's lots, and it's kind of says like pick what you want and put your own combination. It's like it's not a menu or restaurant anymore where there's two menus. There's like now like one of these bowls where the rest you go to one of these bowl places and like there's 50 things you can put in your bowl. I'm like,
I get so
can you please just
overwhelmed.
give me something? Give me your favorite combination. Don't let me choose. It's overwhelming. So that I think is just happening, and this will not go away in any foreseeable future. Like that, this trajectory I think is set by whatever design of the universe, but I think it's pretty much clear. How we deal with it then, that's the big question, and how different types of men or humans then try to create orientation and safety in all of this, I think then is the question. And I would even ask, like, even challenge what you said, like maybe there should be, and I'm a proponent of that. Like one should have always, it helps to have a good orientation in the framing and what's the common ground. But maybe that also already is an assumption that is not workable.
Yeah.
And maybe even not even grounded in reality and never has been. Because one of the things that is always interesting when we talk about men and women, or the masculine, the feminine, depending on the framing. I mean, if you put man, speaking in binary code here, if you put man into a room as you did there, or you did that with even more men, the differences between these men are much larger than the difference you would find if you post them with a group of women, or to say it in a different way, you could find a lot more similarity across men and women, where they would be much more similar in certain ways, and some of these men would be similar to another man in the room. It's just there is this difference of the biology and also of the spiritual principles of the masculine and feminine expressed through that biological gender that makes it interesting to come together. It is one way of dividing people, but it's it packs a huge amount of diversity. And then it is interesting so what it means to be a man, but it's like so maybe it should be titled, what are all the ways you can be a man right now on the planet?
Yeah, which just doesn't sell very well if I'm looking for orientation and someone tells me, well, find your own way. I'm like, fuck you. That's not what I bought. I bought answers, not an invitation to ask more questions.
Yeah, well, actually, what you get is a well-designed supermarket, maybe with more clear guidelines, and so
Yeah,
if you prefer this, you can go into this
yeah,
corner of the supermarket here and maybe get hopefully the organic and Whole Foods version, and less the trash version. But I think it's not realistic to provide a answer. But the question is also, how do we give or bring orientation to somebody who is searching for it? Because now
yeah,
speaking about young men and people in general, but young men, that's something that I meet a lot. With a lot of I meet young people with an incredible versatility or fluidity, or the capacity to really grasp things really quick, and to move fluidly between perspectives, which could amount to what you described as the zigzagging, because I can, you know, because I can be this person or that person for a while. And it's, I think also it's a natural pathway of development. You need, in order to find your identity, you also need to try yourself out, even with your sexual identity, which is not the same as your biological gender. Um, it's well known, like through puberty, adolescence, or the adulthood, you need to explore it and actually to find what speaks to you.
mhm,
But then, so if you have a lot of versatility, a lot of flexibility, um, it doesn't give you the clarity necessarily immediately what to do with that. And the world supports the exploration. Let's say that the Western, still more liberally, progressively oriented world, which is about to change, or is changing already in many parts of the world. So it is supporting that. And so I also feel a lot of, and I've known from my own life, a lot of like questions of like, so what and how and which way, and often knowing more clearly what is
mhm,
not interesting anymore, or what we don't want, but not yet what else. And then there's often a strong orientation with peers, like what does my social echo chamber expecting of me, and what's interesting there. Um, and I think that the real thirst for guidance in a way, but that is not just given and handed down and told like the Bible, like what to do, but is a relational experience. And then the other thing that I meet a lot with men is men that are, let's say, older or have already lived a good part of their lives, and maybe either went onto the track of like, this is the way to live, career, house, family, kids, education, however that is expressed, but like the more classical way of living life. And then, as it always has been, coming to a kind of a reckoning point at one moment in life, either through crisis, a health crisis, very often a relational crisis, and feeling like that somehow things worked out well, but so now what now? Or, so I often put it, like a lot of men that come and that have a lot but feel very little
mhm.
of what they actually have, and describe like, I'm supposed to be happy,
Yeah,
but I am not,
yeah,
and I don't know what's lacking or what am I doing wrong, and then feeling a deep-seated insecurity in themselves. And I think the insecurity is like a bit the overarching theme there, and also what I see in people and in the world. Also, what you describe, people like wanting to find, so what now? And it's the attempt to control as if we should know,
Yeah.
and treating ourselves as like yeah, the quest that we need to find the right path. I think, well, what is not so present anymore is like truer principles that can sustain you even through zigzagging through life, because you can zigzag through life. I mean, I've done a lot of zigzagging, I think. Well, I don't know a lot, but like it was not always just a linear path. I didn't follow the straightforward path. But if I look back, there were very clear principles that didn't change and that are still true now, and they were true 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Mm.
I think we speak less about these deeper dimensions and more about expressions of how to do certain things. And that
Yeah.
I notice sometimes also in the men's movement, so it's quickly on the what to do side, and not so often on a bit more uncomfortable and longer exploration of what is it that I want to live from.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think men's work can, I've I've seen examples where I think most men who do men's work understand that there's not one type of man or male role model that everyone should follow. So ideally, what men's work does is provide multiple role models who embody different, like in men's work, it would be probably called like different archetypes of how a man can show up. And then inviting younger men to be like, who do you most, feel most resonant with? Who do you feel like you resemble the most? And then on some level, like be their disciple, like follow them and learn from them until you feel like, okay, you've learned enough, and or you see, okay, and now it's time to develop something else. So there is that, and there are of course still strong images, like specific forms of how that has to look, that can still feel rigid.
Yeah. And I think I just remembered I saw or read some articles lately about um, the bigger societal trends right now, also about what's kind of called, I don't know if that's the correct term, but like the tech bros, but like a lot of youngish by now, maybe also not anymore so young man that through tech and tech that developed over internet and social media and so on, and all this um, digital kind of hype created where a lot of men have a lot of money, a lot of wealth, a lot of influence, and where somebody was describing their encounters with some of these people, and how he described how emotionally and also philosophically, and even to a certain degree intellectually, and I don't mean like just smartness, because of course they're all super smart, but like in terms of wisdom, and like in terms of orientation in a way that to life that makes sense, how super immature they appear to him,
Yeah.
with all those trends of like which are all stemming from trying to find the ultimate control about life, which is like upload yourself to a chip, like to disembody, to not need to die, and to not need to pay taxes, to not need to be a normal dude that just like does things, where you kind of like even transhumanism or superhumanism, where you just again stuff that we know from history, where suddenly you want to be somebody else, more invincible, more powerful, and
Mhm.
how much that is for a big strata of men right now. Like these are inspirational figures.
Yeah.
They're like heroes. But if you really zoom in, what you meet is a very, very, very strange, to say the least, way of looking at life. That is actually really disconnected from the realities of like, and therefore like we may fuck up this planet, but then just fly to another one. Or we upload ourselves to an imaginary cloud, so we don't need to deal with the realities of our bodies, and how much that is enticing to somebody who is looking for orientation in life, or maybe struggling, let's say, put it this way, with the realities of life.
Yeah.
How our virtual worlds are huge, like to even younger generation, let's, if we go there, a huge seduction, because it fakes the sense of impact and agency.
Yeah.
And I think in that regard, even more, it is a super important question, what we as men right now and as humans, what can we be in order to provide a different orientation, to be an inspiration to somebody.
Yeah, and I think it's a great expression of this. So the fact that there are very few mainstream role models that operate from deep principles aligned with life is an expression of a dying culture and of this lack of orientation as a humanity, just an expression of the chaotic times that we live in, that the people who are in the biggest positions of power are not the people who are following the principles. And so no wonder that's really confusing to be like, the people who have the most success, who have the most fame and all these things don't seem to be the ones that are the most in integrity or connected to life or following the principles. Like, yeah, that must be really confusing. Like, we have all these hierarchies that are meant to somehow represent different levels of skill and wisdom and accomplishment and so on, but if we look at those hierarchies, they're clearly not working in a life-serving way. So that's very confusing.
Yeah, and I think it creates that sense of like, all the times there were institutions and structures, and the kind of promise were, follow this path, learn a trade, study something, build a career, and then your life will be good and it will amount to meaning. And we know how this can happen, but not necessarily because of those choices. This is something you have to find in the deeper cells of this experience through relationality, building a good connection to yourself, and network, and being like supporting your family, your tribe, like being part of life. But also so many ways how this did not work, and people were turned away from institutions and this more institutionalized ways of living life. And then the attraction of disrupting figures, in which we have many on the political or public scene, or going into art and doing everything different, with the hope of like, this didn't work, so this might amount to something.
Yeah.
And of course, it also doesn't deliver it per se. And so again, like there's this like so where, and then from your disposition, you maybe tend to either the more regressive tendency right now, like even get more rigid again, like cut down all the liberal freedoms. Okay, the idea is the supermarket got way too big. You can pick and choose everything, and like some of these things are really dangerous. So we're just gonna have 3 things there to choose and pick from. They're time tested. You're gonna have just like potatoes and not all the other fancy stuff. Or no, we need even more things on the shelves. So we have very two different places you go shopping from. And then they're of course they're in a constant tension with each other.
Hmm. I'm curious for you to bring in the 4 quadrants that you wanted to talk about. I'm thinking of a smart way to transition into this, but I give up.
So just bring it in.
Yes. No,
Yes,
I mean, like, I
it's
just.
very that's it's a very human way of like showing your vulnerability. So, yeah, we can. Yeah, I think my idea about wanting to talk about this is we tend to talk a lot about the places where like the unhealthy expressions,
Yeah.
also the pain points and what people are struggling with. And I realized I think we didn't get very um let's say like detailed or like very we stayed a bit in the general and the abstract, which is my favorite place to hang out. Um, but we tend to talk a lot about that and sketch that up. And I think it's also great to see. So what are actually, when we talk about integration of power and love, what are actually the also the healthy, or I prefer mostly to call it more conscious or more mature expressions of these qualities.
Mhm.
And then um, I kind of use a model or a framework of 4 quadrants where you have a cross, like to a horizontal and a vertical line, and creating four spaces um, to kind of delineate. So going up would be the more healthy and mature versions, and also going down the more unconscious or immature versions. Or I think in our pre-conversation, you also said like, so what are ways to express yourself in a more adult and more with more agency, more self-responsibility kind of ways, and what are things that are coming for more from our survival instincts, our child's consciousness levels, um, and they're just less immature and create more turmoil most
Yeah.
in life. And then the other side also to divide that into the masculine and the feminine principles of life, again, which is a to some degree artificial, but still it can have a nice orientation where the horizontal would serve as the spectrum of this.
Mhm.
And actually ties well into the conversation before where we said, so in older times, it was pretty much clear if you're born into a male body, that means you're supposed to, because you live in a male body, or you are seen clearly as an expression of the masculine principles. Like there was no room to play with that. Like you're in this male body, which is relatively easy to spot, to identify. That means you are a masculine energy. So there was no talk like this is to be a man with these qualities, and then vice versa on the female side, on the feminine side. And I think what's really cool about our time and has always been talked of in more deeper Western traditions, and most notably the yogic tantric traditions, where they talk about the Shiva and the Shakti, and also a lot like in Taoism about the yin and the yang and the masculine and the feminine, which are very time tested, healthy orientations. Actually, I think that could be very helpful.
Mhm.
So where there is a differentiation from your biological
Mhm.
sex, and that we all are composed of masculine and feminine energies, and we need to live through, and we are created through both these principles, and the way you express them, like on a scale, on a spectrum of two poles, is very individual. And then as it will be, if you're in a male body physically, there's a higher likelihood, but it's not given, that you will tend to certain masculine qualities more and vice versa. And I think the power of our times is that these are not like, as I said before, set. Biology means this is the way you express your life, but that you have much more fluidity and more possibility to even be in a male body and to feel drawn a lot to feminine expressions and qualities without that negating your biological identity.
Can you define masculine and feminine for how you're using it?
Um, yes, I can try.
No.
No, that's the big question. Actually, there's many different ways to do that. But it's always spoken as like in the basic duality of life. But the important thing is, I think it's beautifully expressed in the yin and the yang in Taoism, that they're not opposites, they're complementary. Like people have seen probably the yin and the yang symbol, that within black and the white, there's always a white dot in the black and vice versa. So they're not like, it's not a harsh line, but they're different qualities that together create the movement and the circle of life. Like we all were born out of a masculine and a feminine encounter, the sperm and the egg. And so the for me easiest way to make that difference visible is that in the masculine there is a more penetrative, active, outgoing, searching quality, like in sperm, like it moves towards, and it penetrates, like it penetrates through the oval, and that's a good thing. That of course, unhealthy expressions, that's how we often in modern times equate that with like the toxic masculinity. It always wants just the one thing and is violent and all of those things, but in its healthy, or it's in its natural essential state, it's just that quality of life that just activates. So it's the daylight, it's more equated with the sun. It's equated with the drive, and then all the and expanding, and even differentiating, like this and not this. So I want to have this all more clarified. And then the feminine principle in contrast, or as a complementary quality, is more receptive. It's interesting that sometimes it used to be called in all the times like passive, like active and passive. And I think there's already a big pathology in there, because it's not passive in the sense of like lack of energy or lack of agency or not having action. Both are fully ways to express life, but the receptive is just not outgoing per se, but is receiving, but that is its power. And it's not a weakness when you're being penetrated by the sperm. Its power is in containing, encompassing, receiving, drawing in. One could even go so far into sort of say, where does it start? Is the egg just sitting there waiting passively, and then the sperm comes with all its actions, or is there a call from the egg to the sperm that activates them in order to actually, so that they know where they're going? Drawing a line to the lack of orientation for men, like there's a lot of energy that men want to do something, but if they don't know what they're doing it for or in service of, and it creates a lot of mess often, because it's just like running around doing a bunch of stuff without, for what? And so in the feminine, there is a lot more, it's this deep connection to life, to life's rhythms, also like in a female body, so the cyclical way of being, where you're tapped into the cycle of life, of death and rebirth, and the deep wisdom that comes with that. And yeah, the power of containing and also resting. And it's like, again, like in conception, where then the sperm is received, and then there is actually stillness before anything happens. And from there, a real blossoming and unfolding of life happens. So the feminine is less about doing something, but more about integrating, holding, and love in the sense of like connecting. It's not where the masculine is more busy with differentiating and not this and not this, and therefore like creating, like knowing itself through opposition. The feminine is more like knowing itself through feeling the connection, the interconnectedness with everything. And we can already see when we talk about these principles what is emphasized in our life, in our culture. It's not always been in all cultures that way, but like we have a huge overemphasis on mostly the not so healthy aspects of the masculine, and sometimes a big disregard, which you can see in how hard it is for women in our modern world to be a cyclical being, where there's a disregard for everything feminine, which is changing now again, but used to be a really strong tendency. This was disregarded, shamed, put to the evil corner of life when women were menstruating, and so on and so on and so on.
Yeah.
So there's this quality that draws in, holds, and nourishes and nurtures. And again, then of course you can put those two principles also into the archetypical father and mother qualities that for a healthy development of any child and of any project and of any relationship and of anything, basically, in my opinion, in life, you need both qualities, but not always in a perfect balance or harmony.
Yep.
That's the other thing that often is, I think, misunderstood, where it was often taught, even in self-help work, you need to balance your inner masculine and your inner feminine. And that's true, but balance does not mean like equal measure.
Yep.
You need to have exactly 50% of this and 50% of this. And if one gets 1% more, you need to be, you're off balance. I think balance here relates to the finding your current equilibrium of expressing yourself on the spectrum. And that can be very masculine, or with a strong dominance on the masculine or the feminine, but this lives in balance because it's not disregarding or denying or cutting out the other part, but that's just your authentic expression. And also for this moment in life, I think there is like a set point for this life in general, but also through different phases in life that changes. Everybody, when you're younger, is more like also Taoism and Chinese medicine, for example, speaks about that beautifully, that you start with more yang, like for kids and teenagers, like you're all over the place. And most likely you're not like this anymore when you're 60 or 70 or 80, where you become more yin. But it doesn't mean that you're need to equate it with being useless and passive. Actually, you can be full of life energy.
Yeah.
It expresses itself differently.
Yeah. Nice. It's nice when you talk about this. Enjoy it. And get the sense that you could talk about this for a lot longer. Just seeing the time, I have about 10 more minutes left on my end. Could you go into, so you talked about
maybe this I don't know for the conversation here, but maybe it is a nice teaser for now that we just talked about the principles, and then I think for another time we could spend more time on, because there's a lot in there, in terms of, so how does this express itself in more mature adult versions, and how does it
Yeah.
express, and also in there again, it's not just, maybe that's what I want to say actually to wrap up this conversation, that the wisdom in there is, again, is not finding one way and I'm just going to do that. Actually, the wisdom is to understand that whatever I pick, even the most virtuous, great quality that I can find, but if I just practice that one thing and it is not kind of integrated and encompassed with other things to make that a full, healthy expression, I will inevitably recreate the shadow element of this as well. It's maybe a bit like what we were talked last time. I think you mentioned this, a guy with like an extreme ownership quality. I don't know how do you call it? Like extreme ownership?
Yeah.
So where ownership and taking responsibility, for example, is a very mature masculine expression of life and beautiful things. But if you pull everything into that corner, into that quadrant, it's like that's my North Star to everything. You will inevitably create also the more unhealthy expressions of life, which is like splitting yourself off from other things, which then in turn will create even more shadow effects. So
Yeah.
every time you want to simplify the great mystery of life so that it just suits your comfort, because even extreme ownership can be a comfortable thing, because then I don't need to think and I know what I'm going to do, with all respect to the
Man's dream.
person.
I have this
Yeah,
one thing and all I have
exactly.
to follow.
Exactly. Then you will always create some other shadow elements, and that is fine also. And like, I mean, I just personally have a tendency, I think maybe from my spiritual orientation or practice or just the way I am, I don't know, to feel passionate for inclusion, in the sense of like an inner inclusivity, that I want to bring aboard more and more and more of myself, and not practice things that will deliberately drive other things into the unconscious realms.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people, understandably, will choose things that will work for them very well, but has a cost of a split, or like a functional split, because a lot of people live in a functional split. I split off certain aspects of myself that are jeopardizing my functional way of being in a certain way in life. Like for the corporate CEO, it's like his crazy, wild, or lazy part that needs to be split off a little bit. Otherwise, it's just not gonna make him very driven to get up every morning and work 15 hours or whatever. And maybe for the artist hippie that sits on the beach, he needs to be split off from his ambitious career self that actually wants to have money and wants to have fame. Otherwise, he would just do something else. Just to have very cartoonish examples. And sometimes we split off things and it functions well and makes sense. And people, if that's their passion or that's what they want to do, then that's fine. But for me, I'm just really more interested in seeing what creates over time more sustainability, of more things of myself being able to be present. Because
Yeah.
thinking along, this is what constitutes to peace inside myself. Because
Mhm.
if I split off stuff myself, the other person that I split off that represents these qualities will piss me off, or I need to go to war with.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess it's a matter of, that's why the spiritual orientation I think is important here, because it's a matter of timeline. Like if I think of, if I if I if I also think beyond my own lifetime, then what you're describing will be much more interesting. Whereas if my perception of success or accomplishment is very limited to my own life, then there might actually be other ways. And I think that's one of the reasons why there are many other ways that are much more popular these days,
Yeah.
is because, yeah, if my time frame is 10 years, there might be faster ways to get there than through this kind of integration that you're describing, but it's
For sure.
yeah.
Yes. And I think it's like there is this general philosophical or spiritual underpinning that makes sense there. So what on the deeper in the deeper sense am I orienting towards?
Yeah. So we leave that as a teaser for next time, the 4 quadrants and how they can provide orientation there.
Yes, I think so.
Sweet.
It's a good way of keeping people hooked. Hopefully.
Let us know if you're hooked.
Exactly. And if not, you will probably not let us know.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Gregor.
Okay, thank you, David.